Hello and welcome to this Autovista Group webinar, The Economy Behind Large Batteries in Electric Vehicles. Is bigger better? I'm Tom Geggus, editor of Autovista 24, and I'm going to be your moderator today. On our panel is a group of Autovista Group experts, starting with Christof Engelskirchen, chief economist at Autovista Group, Dr Anne Lange, Autovista Group Director of Research and Innovation, Christoph Ruhland, Director of Business Development at Autovista Group, and last but by no means least, Christian Schneider, Director of Content at EV Volumes. Thank you all very much for joining me today. So, what can you expect from this webinar? Well, we're going to be focusing on three pretty major business critical topics: the impact of battery size on performance and pricing, and the role of plug-in hybrids. And then we're also going to look into what vehicle manufacturers are doing and whether they're on the right track. Now, all of this is going to be followed up by a brilliant Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So if you've got any questions for our experts throughout this webinar, please make sure to put them in the question box and we'll get back to you at the end of the session. Now, just to say, we do often get an awful lot of fantastic questions coming to us via the question box. So if we don't reach you in this webinar, please don't be worried. We'll reach out to you afterwards. Equally, if any data, insights, or products are going to pique your interest today, that's fantastic, and we'd love you to let us know about it, and we'd love you to find out more. All you've got to do is head to autovistagroup.com/explore. That's on the bottom left of the screen right now, and you'll find an awful lot more information about Autovista Group's products and services. Now, the battery ranges of battery-powered electric vehicles have increased considerably over the past years, and at the same time, the list prices have also been going up, creating something of a barrier to the mass market. But what is the impact on battery size on a vehicle and its performance? And will a larger battery pay off in the end? Christian, I'm going to come to you first. How have capacities and ranges of electric vehicles developed over the past few years for BEVs?
Thank you, Tom, and good morning, everyone. What you can see on this slide is basically our Autovista specification data about WLTP range and DC charging speed per production year, or cars that are in production in a certain year, and we can see then how this developed. And maybe before we continue with what we really see, just a word maybe for those who are not so super familiar with what does DC charging mean. So DC charging is mainly the fast charging that you can do on the highway or somewhere in between, and the opposite would be AC charging. So mainly, in most cases, your wall box at home. There are a few public ones as well, but yeah. What we could see over the last years is, if you look on the left side of the chart, so sticking to range a little bit, that the average range in over the years, so from 2021 to 2024, has nearly increased by 30%, so to be a very exact 28%, and is reaching now 375 kilometers on average this year. So this is a very strong development that we see, and also if we not only look on this development, if you also have this total number, so nearly 400 kilometers on average at the moment in mind, this is also so as I said, it's an average, so it means we also have cars in here which are very small, with small batteries, like Dacia Springs, Fiat 500s as well. So that means an average car that you are buying at the moment, EV, where you want to use it in daily use, also for longer distances, has a very good sufficient range for most use cases at the moment. So range anxiety is not a big issue anymore with the current generation of EVs that we can see, and this is why we thought it would be also a good idea today to look on the charging speed, because we see a small shift at the moment from range anxiety to charging anxiety, because also our charging infrastructure across Europe has grown a lot in the past, but is still maybe struggling a little bit in some regions. And also because, of course, a lot of this range is coming from bigger batteries. And if you want to fill this battery again, a bigger battery, you also need to have higher charging speed to don't waste more time at a charging station than before. And what we can see is that also charging speed increased by roughly a quarter, so more or less the same ratio like we see the range increase over the last years.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Christian. Christoph Engelskirchen, I'm going to come to you next. Is bigger better? Maybe you can walk us through the economics of larger battery units.
Yes, certainly, Tom. And we've tried to make this as tangible as possible by comparing some cars, some real cars, which are quite successful and or quite new also in the market. And this chart here shows the new vehicle transaction prices for the Tesla Model Y in the standard range and in the long range version. Yeah, so these are the first two bars on the chart. And then we see bar number 3 and 4 is the Volvo EX30, yeah, with the standard range and also the long range. I've added some delivery costs for the Model Y, but these are transaction prices, and you can see, give or take 10% additional costs are being charged. Yeah, so in the case of Tesla, it's 9%. In the case of EX30, it's 13%. In absolute terms, you might say, okay, for Tesla, that's not so much, so 3,300 euros. But then you could also argue for Tesla in the standard range, you already get 455 kilometers of WLTP range, which is absolutely enough, for most use cases. In the case of EX30, the benefits of extra range may be more tangible because you're moving from 337 to 475. So that, feels like it's a little bit more important possibly, and adding more value, and they charge you a little bit more for that extra value. Yeah. We've also tried to move this, one level deeper on the next slide. And the next slide is a bit more complicated, but I'm going to lead you through it step by step. So we're still comparing the short range or standard range versions of Model Y with the long range versions of Model Y and EX30. On the top of the chart, you see the TCO differences when moving from the short or standard range to the long range. And on the bottom two charts, you see convenience differences. But let's stay on the top for now, and let's look at the top left chart, to be even more specific and precise here. And the first number you see on the top left chart is 6,168 euro. That is the net leasing rate per year that you will pay for the standard range Model Y in a 3-year, 20,000 kilometer contract. Yeah, I've added a little bit of insurance cost to make it comparable with the Volvo on the right side. So the 6,168 is what you're going to be paying every year, to drive that car in the standard range. If you move to long range, you will have to pay 684 euros more per year. Yeah, so that's roughly this, this 10% that we saw on the previous slide as well. And we thought, let's look at the charging cost differences of the short range or standard range and the long range. And with a longer range vehicle, you will be charging less publicly, and public charging is a bit more expensive. So you're going to save remarkable 59 euros per year, which isn't a lot, right? So you might have thought, I'm going to save more money with it. Obviously, it does depend a little bit on the scenario here. For the 20,000 kilometers, we're looking at 20% long distance driving. But I can tell you, even if you extend this to 50% long distance driving, it's still not going to make a huge difference. Yeah. So the cost you're saving because you have a longer range, you charge less publicly, are not so material in this example. So you'll end up paying 10% more for Model Y long range versus standard range. Yeah. On the right side, similar dynamics here. It's 9% more in the case of EX30. What some of you will notice is that the leasing rate for Model Y is extremely attractive, compared to what Volvo Care is charging customers. But that's a side note. That's not what we're trying to comment here, but you will notice it on the chart. So I mean, so what? It's still roughly 10% more, right? You have to pay for the long range. So let's look at the convenience differences. And here, things become more interesting. In the case of Model Y, you will have to stop 16 times if you drive the short, or let's call it standard range version. By moving to 600 kilometers WLTP, you'll save 6 stops. Yeah, total stops would be then 10. I mean that's okay. Yeah, but you could argue that's not material, right? So the standard range 455 is absolutely suitable, you know, for most people, for most use cases, and it's really a question of, you know, whether you want to afford the additional capacity in the battery. But I mean, it's not necessary, yeah, from a convenience perspective. We're talking still about annual stops here, yeah, so that's immaterial. For the EX30, it's a little bit more material. So you would be changing your number of stops from 26 to 16. So I would say here it does make a little bit more sense to move to these, you know, to the longer range, if that is your use case. But I'm still talking 20,000 kilometers, which is sizable, 80% short range, 20% long range. If you were to have a more extreme scenario here, let's say 50% long range driving, I'm talking about several 500 kilometer trips, several 1,000 kilometer trips, then in the case of EX30, it almost becomes mandatory to move to the long range. Yeah. So in a nutshell, you have to look at your driver profile, your driver scenario. If you are at, you know, 450 of WLTP range, probably you're going to be fine, yeah, in most cases. But of course, if you have a particular long range scenario that you need to deal with, then the bigger range becomes affordable at an additional 10%.
So very much user dependent. Thank you, Christoph. Anne Lange, I'm going to come to you next because I want to explore remarketing. Do bigger batteries pay off on the used car market when it comes to remarketing? Do these models sell at higher price, for example?
Yes, Tom. Thanks, Tom, for the question, and hi, everybody. So to answer that question, I was thinking it makes sense to look at used car portal data and the prices that battery electric vehicles realize in these markets. So what you can see on the left side is the residual value of battery electric vehicles up to 10,000 kilometers, so relatively new electric vehicles, compared to the list price. So basically the price when they left the portal compared to the list price. And you can see that there are several buckets for the battery sizes of the vehicle. So 0 to 50 kilowatt hours and then up to 80 kilowatt hours plus. And what we can see here is that larger battery sizes indicate that higher prices will be achieved percentage-wise from the list price. And similarly, what you can see on the right is average days to sell. And there we can see a similar sort of beneficial trend for higher batteries. So higher batteries sell quicker. So you can see the days to sell declining. It's not quite as linear as the trend that we have for the pricing, because higher battery cars will always be a bit more expensive in absolute terms. We did have a similar analysis on range as well, where we sort of created range groups, and the picture is quite similar. So I thought I'd just give you that on audio. One thing to note on this, though, is that it's quite hard to isolate the effect of battery size, because larger batteries will always be built into larger segments and will have usually better equipment, better trims, higher horsepower. So it's a bit convoluted, but the data indicates that larger battery sizes do give higher residue values.
Thank you so much, Anna. So we've definitely been exploring BEVs in the first segments of our webinar this morning, but now I think it's time that we turn our attention to plug-in hybrids, because they've been experiencing something of a second wind with bigger batteries and improved driving ranges. But the question is that going to last? And what does this mean for the technology as still quite a recently fresh development? Christian Schneider, I'm going to come back to you. How are market shares and volumes developing for PHEVs? Are they the new stars in the EV universe? What's your outlook?
Thank you, Tom. So what we can see on this slide is the development of the past, of the historical development of plug-in hybrid shares in some selected regions or markets, and also from this year, so from 2024 onwards, also our forecast, how we think it will develop in those regions. And so those, let's say, those dotted or disrupted lines are always for bigger regions like Europe or global, and the straight lines are always for single countries that are selected in Europe. And the first thing that is maybe also jumping in your eyes is the black line, so the German PHEV share, which was dramatically dropping in 2023. And I guess some of you know, some others maybe not, that last year the German subsidies for PHEV buyers was running out in Germany, and this is the result that we can see at the moment. So the PHEV share dropped significantly, so by nearly or less than the half of what it has been in 2022. And I think this is a good example of what could happen in some countries if you remove subsidies too early for some cases. And what we expect is that for Germany, it will be quite a moderate growth that we will see this year and next year. It will more or less stay between 6 and 8% of share of the total market. And afterwards, it will start to decline because we think, like in most European markets, customers will switch latest from next year on their preferences even more to purely battery electric vehicles than what we can see at the moment. And I'm speaking already about Europe and representation, and what we can also see, and I think this is why I put in also France, so the green line here is, I think this is representing, it's only one country, but it is representing very good what we can see in a lot of big European countries at the moment, is that we see a continuous decline in most countries, not such big drops like in Germany, but a continuous slight decrease in PHEV shares over the last years. And we also assume that this trend, like I said, will continue in the future because people will go more for battery electric vehicles. And I also brought one country with me today, Poland, which is also representing a little bit what we can see in more Eastern European countries in general at the moment. So the electrification in Poland is not at such a high level like we can see in more Western or Northern countries in Europe, for example. So for purely battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids, we can see they are really below 4% here, the plug-in hybrids. Also, battery electric vehicles are not doing too great here at the moment. But we also don't assume that going forward, PHEVs will be the technology that will be used in Eastern European countries like Poland. So we think there will be a switch coming. So where also those new car markets have to adapt more to more CO2 friendly technologies. But if this is happening, most used car buyers, new car buyers will directly go for purely battery electric vehicles and not so much for PHEVs. The only thing or the only line where we see another trend is the global line, which is maybe interesting. So if we look on the global expectations for the future, we see that this line, so this purple, disrupted purple line, will very marginally grow over the next years. And this trend is mainly coming from China. So, I mean, China is still by far our biggest market or region in the world. So everything that is happening there has directly an influence on our global numbers. And what we can observe is that in China, EREVs, so battery electric vehicles with an additional ICE engine as a range extender, are getting way more and more popular. We see very strong growth rates in China in this at the moment. And at EV volumes, so where also this data is coming from, we classify EREVs as plug-in hybrids. So this is also why we can see this increasing share globally, mainly because of China.
Thank you so much, Christian. Now, as we saw in our last webinar, plug-in hybrids and battery electric vehicles have been struggling on used markets. Anne Lange, maybe you could talk us through the current situation, and I believe you have a demonstration for us.
Yes, thank you, Tom. So I will take over the screen from you shortly. Reason being that I want to share with you our tool Residual Value Intelligence. I assume you can see the screen. So residual value intelligence is a tool that we have, and that is showing market weighted residual values across multiple European countries. So market weighted means that sort of every vehicle is accounted for as much as it actually appears in the market, which gives a good overview about the state of the used car market. And what you can see here is the residual values in Germany, as an example, for 3-year-old vehicles with 60,000 kilometers, broken down by different fuel types. So you can see the light green line and the dark green line for plug-in hybrids or fully electric vehicles, respectively. And like the general trend was over the last 2.5 years, so we're starting at January 22 here, that there was like a post-COVID increase, a general increase in residual values, and then a decline over the last 1.5 years or so. What is noteworthy about plug-in electric vehicles and fully electric vehicles is that they have been behind combustion engines. So in the same manner, plus or minus, but they have been behind. Plug-in hybrids less so than electric vehicles. And that is a trend really that can be seen in multiple European countries. If we, for example, switch to the United Kingdom, you will see a similar trend where the gap's a bit narrower for plug-in hybrids, and for electric vehicles, the gap is a bit larger. So this is now 3-year-old cars. If we look into 1-year-old cars, so I'm picking 1-year-old cars, 15,000 kilometers, you can see that the gap is becoming narrower, or there's even the same level as combustion engines. So for younger vehicles, the gap is sort of disappearing between plug-ins and combustion engines, less so for electric vehicles. I'll just switch to one more country, Switzerland, where we can see a similar trend. So that is sort of similar trend across Europe, where for younger vehicles, residual values are catching up, but for older vehicles, there's a gap.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anna. So perhaps then, are we seeing an increasing shift in the dynamics of PHEVs as used cars? Are they now more sought after as used cars than they were, say, a few years ago?
Yes, Tom. So to answer that question, I brought with me a bit more sort of forward-looking piece of analysis. So what we can see here is forecasted used car values. So vehicles that are now in production and their forecasted residual value in 3 years as a 3-year-old car. And the graphics a bit similar to earlier. So we have this as an example of Germany, where we see the residual values on the y-axis, and the size of the plug-in hybrid electric vehicle battery in different groups on the x-axis. And similarly as before, we can see that with increased battery size, the forecasted and expected residual values will be increasing. Maybe to give a bit of a relation, 20 kilowatt hours roundabout account for 100 kilometers of purely electric driving range. Similarly as before, though, even though the data indicates that a larger battery in plug-in hybrids yields better residual values, again, this effect cannot be seen isolated, as usually newer models will have larger batteries built in, and also larger segments will have larger batteries built in, and they are usually a bit more sought after. So again, this effect cannot really be seen isolated. But yeah, as a conclusion, there needs to be a meaningful battery electric driving range for achieving good residual values.
Thank you so much, Anna. I think that takes us on to the final segment of today's webinar. And we're going to take a look at the transition to the mass market and how electric vehicles are making that move. And asking really, are car makers on the right track? And how do any recently launched models compare to what is currently present on the market? So I'm going to turn to answer that question to Christoph Ruhland. You're obviously involved in the latest launches with many OEMs, and there's plenty of new brands out there. So how do the new launches of PHEVs and BEVs compare with what we've seen, say, from 3 years ago? What's changing as we transition to the mass market?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Good morning to everyone. Basically, if we compare launches 3 years ago with today's launches, we see two big areas that have changed. Of course, there are many changes, but there are two major, let's say, call it trends. Christian showed us on the first slide that we have seen that the average WLTP range has increased from 2021 to 2024 by 28%. Yeah, that's a lot. And this trend is mainly driven by the trend towards larger batteries. Yeah. And this trend is happening for BEVs and lately for PHEVs as well. So on the next chart, we have highlighted some BEVs and PEVs with large batteries. Yeah, this one. So on the left side with the blue bars, you can see BEVs with very, very large batteries. So the VinFast VF9 is not launched yet, 123 kilowatt battery, Mercedes EQS 118, Lucid Air, for example, Grand Touring 112. The Lucid Air Dream that is not offered anymore in Europe had 118 kilowatt. Yeah, that's enormous. We see a few from Geely Corporation, Lotus, Polestar, Volvo 109, 107. So we see appearing now really a lot of EVs with big batteries. And then on the right side, some PHEVs, their also battery size has increased drastically. So Denza, this is a luxury brand of BYW coming from BYD, sorry, coming from China with a luxury van D9. They announced a 40 kilowatt battery. So we are constantly in touch with many new brands coming from China. We know that other corporations, they also have plans to launch PEVs with batteries around 40 kilowatt hours, which will then allow real purely electric driving ranges of 150 to 200 kilometer. Yeah, and this will turn PHEVs into something very useful, yeah, for most of the drivers. And if we just remember, to put it in contrast, the first mass-produced EV was the Nissan Leaf. Yeah, it was launched in 2010, and at that time it had a 24 kilowatt battery. Yeah, so please compare this now with the 40 kilowatt battery of some PHEVs.
So do you have some more data to support this, Christoph?
Yes. So if you flip to the next slide, we see on the left side with the blue bars, we see the battery sizes by production year. And we see that we now have achieved or arrived at 71 kilowatt in average. Yeah, this is an increase over the last 3 years by 14%. Yeah, and on the right side, we see the average WLTP consumption has reduced by 9%. Yeah, and this is, of course, because we have achieved some efficiencies, but also more and more BEVs have been launched in smaller segments now, yeah, which lead to then lower consumptions. Yeah, what you don't see on the slide yet, and the second trend or second area that have changed due to the launches compared to 3 years is that the Chinese are coming. Yeah, so it's no secret, and mostly they came with very, very ambitious plans, and they also made some mistakes in the past, and currently they seem to have a hard time. However, they learn very, very quickly from their mistakes, and they draw the right conclusions. So we can all see this with their strategies changing now. We did some research on Chinese brands, and we found 20 automotive groups. Yeah. and we found 90 different Chinese car brands. So 90, 90. Yeah. And this brand landscape is, of course, constantly changing. And we are aware of at least 25 Chinese brands, yeah, that are already in Europe or plan to enter Europe within the next 12 months. Yeah, and that's massive. And these OEMs, they will bring new moderately priced BEVs and PHEVs to the market, often also in smaller segments, but not necessarily with smaller batteries. Yeah, so therefore, battery sizes and ranges will keep increasing.
So given this, what is it that you're recommending to OEMs? Do they need to keep increasing battery sizes for BEVs, or should they just keep on working on bringing down costs of EVs overall?
Yeah, it's a difficult question, as OEMs face currently a dilemma. So they have to offer sufficient range, yeah, while they have to reduce costs at the same time. So first question is, what is a sufficient range? And of course, this depends on several factors. So it depends on your driver profile, whether it's your primary or secondary car, yeah, and your charging capabilities. Yeah. But of course, I'm happy to give you my opinion. So my recommendation to OEMs would be to focus rather on smart range, yeah, than rather adding more and more larger battery packs into the cars, yeah, because larger battery packs, they make the cars, of course, heavier, yeah. You need more space in the car for the battery, so you have less car for the passengers, yeah. It's not good for driving dynamics. Yeah, you increase the consumption, of course, with the additional weight. Yeah, you have to beef up your suspension. You have to increase your brakes. Yeah, enlarge your brakes, and of course, this all is increasing the cost of the car. Yeah, so in my opinion, current BEVs on the market have a sufficient range, and therefore I would recommend OEMs to focus on smart range. And with smart range, I mean to improve on the overall efficiency of the car. So instead stuffing in larger batteries, they should now focus to enhance efficiency of the engine, charger, and the battery system. And there are already some brands or cars on the market that have a very, very good efficiency. So we see some Korean cars on the market, yeah, or Tesla, or even Lucid. Yeah, so these are cars that you can drive with 16, 17 kilowatt per 100 kilometers in the reality. Yeah. In the future, of course, solid state batteries could be the solution. Yeah. So this would be a quantum leap, as they offer a much higher energy density, yeah, lower weight, yeah, and a reduced size, yeah. But they still a few years away from us, and at the beginning they won't, of course, be cost effective. So therefore, until we have solid state batteries in the cars, I recommend to OEMs that they should prioritize cost efficiency over large batteries. And just the last addition, given the competition that is coming now from China, cost reductions are critical for the survival of the European automakers. So we can see this now all, and we read about this in the press. So therefore, focus on lowering costs.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Christoph. This actually brings us to the end of our last segment for this webinar and into the Q&A section. So thank you to everyone who has provided a question so far. I've seen some excellent ones come in, and I will encourage you now to continue to provide those questions because we would love to answer them for you. So if we don't, of course, get any time to answer those questions, please don't fear. We will get back to you after the webinar is over and let you know, give you an answer to your question. Equally, as I said, if you've found certain things interesting so far in today's webinar, then do make sure to check out autovistagroup.com/explore, and I'll tell you everything you need to know about Autovista Group data and services. So first off, Christian Schneider, questions coming for you. You were talking earlier about FEV shares, and there was certainly some interest there about how the European decrease is compared to the global increase and how that's quite interesting. But which markets globally are we going to see a rise in their FEV stocks? I know you mentioned China, but which other markets are we really going to see FEVs take off in?
Yeah, so it is globally, it is really mainly China, so where we see this very dominant trend. And as China is such a huge important market, it has directly an impact on the whole global picture. So it is really mainly China at the moment. And there again, it is not so much about the plug-in hybrids that we see at the moment in Europe, for example. So the classical plug-in hybrids is really a lot about the EREVs, which is a lot related again to some restrictions and laws that we have in place in China at the moment. Yeah.
Absolutely, thank you very much. Anne Lange, I'm going to come to you next if I can, because you gave us a fantastic demo through RVI, and you talked about a tipping point when we look at the BEV mix and what's needed. So when do we expect the ICE and HEV models to start to see lower RVs compared with battery electric vehicles? When are we going to see that turning point?
So I mean, that depends a bit on circumstantial factors as well, like subsidies and penalization also of ICE engines. But I think with everything that's been said today, with the sort of rise in ranges and better sort of drivability, usability of electrified drivetrains, I mean, we can already see that with the very young used cars. So we sort of, I think there. And one thing I wanted to say. Yeah, I mean, what Christoph said earlier as well about the pricing structure. I mean, it needs to be sort of affordable and similarly affordable as ICE engines for consumers to be interested in.
Absolutely. I mean, how are we seeing the technology evolving for FEV batteries? Are there new batteries at play here? Are there better ones? Is it just about achieving greater range? Christian, I'm going to come back to you for a second if I can, and maybe we can move on and get Christoph Ruhland's take on it.
So just to get it, it's about the plug-in battery technology, right? Yeah.
Correct.
I mean, what we see is at the moment is in plugins, it's like also Christoph mentioned one of his parts, it's a lot about we build in bigger batteries in the plug-in cars at the moment. It's not so much about smart range. The consumption didn't drop significantly over the last years, but we see that bigger batteries are coming in, but it is also bigger cars normally where those bigger batteries coming in. If you remember that slide from Christoph, all of them have big MPVs or SUVs with all of these big batteries in. So this is maybe not the most fuel or energy efficient vehicle segments, let's say it like this, where we have those big batteries. But what we can see in terms of technology improvement, I would say, besides battery or capacity dumping, is that the charging technology in PHEVs is also starting to change. So, I mean, just 2 years ago, it was the normal standard that you could charge only AC your car with 3.6 kilowatt hours maybe, or kilowatt per hour at home. And now we see that more and more vehicles or plug-in hybrids get DC charging capabilities, like with 50 kilowatt hour per hour or even more sometimes, to also increase the usage of the battery more. I mean, so you can go a longer trip and maybe you can charge it with 50 kilowatt hours within half an hour, 40 minutes again, when you are doing, I don't know, a supermarket stop somewhere or a coffee stop at your longer trip, and you can use it again. So there we see a shift, I think a bigger shift than with a pure battery capacity at the moment. Yeah.
Christoph Ruhland, what are you seeing from car makers in terms of that range?
Yeah, in terms of PHEVs, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So as I said before, we see this. I can just repeat what Christian said, mainly coming from China. So I'm on a daily contact with OEMs from China, and we are aware of a lot of PHEV models that will come with, as I said, batteries around 40 kilowatt hours, which will then, as I said before, turn PHEV into something really usable, so where you can really use the electric range. In the past, PHEVs had a very bad image Yeah, as PHEVs were mostly driven by company car drivers who just wanted to lower their benefit in kind and just to benefit from government incentives. Yeah, but at the same time, those company drivers, they still had a fuel card paid by the company, so no need to pay attention to recharge the car, yeah, on a daily basis. Yeah. However, those incentive schemes for PHEVs, they have disappeared in most of the European markets. Yeah. And now with the new PHEVs coming with the bigger batteries, you can really drive them yeah, in a more sustainable way, so more eco-friendly than before.
Thank you very much. We're talking a lot about PHEVs here, and I do wonder if they pose a remarketing risk to anyone operating a fleet, to anyone who has any asset risks. Christoph Engelskirchen, should we be worried about PHEVs, given that they could be considered a transitional technology just towards battery electric vehicles?
Yeah, we're having a lot of discussions around this, of course, in the team and with customers. I think it's more of a blessing in disguise, possibly even. There's so much uncertainty at the moment from from governments and from consumers, and we've learned that the internal combustion engine technology, for example, is also considered as a transitional technology, and nobody's really worried about remarketing risks for those. So coming back to your question, I think if you consider Europe as your playground for remarketing, I think there are fantastic opportunities for PHEVs on used car markets and new car markets, because it's a blessing, right? It's very helpful to get customers on board in the transition to green mobility.
I wonder if we're going to see things change slightly in 2 to 3 years. Is there going to be a risk for those, particularly if they have a good battery, Christoph Ruhland?
Yeah, so I mean, the residual value is a price for a used car, and this price depends on supply and demand, obviously. And honestly, a few years ago, we were quite concerned about the oversupply that we saw for PHEVs in some markets, especially in Germany, where we had this government incentive, and you could see it before on the slide from Christian Schneider, that where he showed the development of market shares for PHEVs, and the German black line nearly crushed then after the yeah, termination of the government scheme. So this means that now we do not see an oversupply, yeah, as it's now yeah, not driven by incentive schemes, yeah. So therefore, if you have a PHEV with a good battery, I wouldn't be worried for RVs in 3 years. So we have of course a lot of tools, and the tool that Anne Lange showed, residual value intelligence, by fuel type, you could see it. PHEVs have already lost yeah, some residual value, but it seems that they have reached nearly the bottom now. Yeah, so we don't expect yeah, any more bigger declines for PHEVs. So therefore, I wouldn't be worried too much. And as Christoph said, no one is worried about the evolution of diesel and petrol residual values, as they are very constant. Yeah. However, they are a transition technology as well. So no worries there.
And there was just one more question for you, Christoph. Would you mind clarifying? You mentioned 40 kilowatt-hour PHEVs earlier on in the webinar. Were they the ones intended for European launch?
Yes. So I'm aware of at least 3 models that they are intended to be launched in the next 12 months. Yeah. So beginning of next year and mid of next year, and I'm sure we will see more of those cars coming.
Great. Thank you so much. That is all we have time for in this webinar today. We've nearly run our 45 minutes. I'd like to thank everyone who's attended today. It's been fantastic to see all of your excellent questions come through. And again, if we haven't been able to get to them, I'm so sorry, but you will hear back from us via your email. Now, we do hope you've gained lots of valuable insights on electric vehicle batteries today. That's PHEVs and BEVs, of course. But if you want to find out more, please do reach out to us. Go to autovistagroup.com/explore, and we'll have a form there for you to fill out if you want to find out more about our products and services. Equally, make sure you check out Autovista24 for your latest news and insights. Once again, I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and thank again my panel, who have been absolutely fantastic answering everyone's questions and presenting such a great range of information. So thank you all very much and have a fantastic day.
Thank you, Tom. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Tom.